Hey, how you doing? I'm Joe Dallas. Thank you for joining me. Uh, I would say in 2023, most Bible-believing Christians would still say that homosexuality is wrong. But there are a growing number of believers who are saying, well, yeah, it's wrong, but it's no big deal. Maybe it's a sin, but we can and we should accept openly gay people into church membership. We shouldn't discipline our own members if they practice homosexuality. It really is a secondary issue. It is, in essence, no big deal. Are they right? And let's talk about that today. First, let's talk about subscriptions. Now, if you're, visiting today, first time you've watched this podcast, hey, good to see you. I hope you enjoy it. And I hope to see you again, like I said. But if you have been watching for a while now, I know a lot of folks are watching the podcast, but they still haven't subscribed. We really need you to subscribe if this is something that you feel like you'd like to be a part of and you're enjoying these messages. Won't you hit that bell? In the comments section, please let me know you subscribed. I want to thank you personally for that. But I want to build up more community here in this Christians in a Cancel Culture podcast. So let's get to know each other more. I want to send you some materials, keep you posted on projects I've got coming up, keep you posted on upcoming speaking engagements. So, like I said, let's build more of a relationship here. Okay, please do subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, is homosexuality a no big deal kind of an issue? Um, Meaning that it's something that's wrong, but is not that terribly wrong. Good example, speeding. I'm guilty. I speed. I I try not to too much, but especially if I'm on a long trip on the freeway. Yeah, I don't always pay that close attention to the 65-mile-an-hour speed limit, and I will admit that to you without a whole amount of shame. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I don't think you're going to stop watching me because I speed occasionally. Could this be one of those secondary issues? Is homosexuality sort of like a you say tomato, I say tomato sort of a thing? Because there are doctrinal issues that are secondary, right? Whether or not we should drink alcohol, when the rapture of the church is going to come. We don't break fellowship over those things. Well, there is a movement afoot now to classify homosexuality in that same category. No big deal. I call it the reduction movement. The reduction movement. That is the second of three pro-gay trends I want to talk to you about in this series I'm doing. I call the series Evangelic LGBTQ. It's about three pro-gay trends that are currently influencing the church and really influencing the way we approach not only homosexuality, but human sexuality in general and the Bible itself. So last week we talked about the revisionist approach, which is basically to revise our understanding of the Bible and make it pro-gay. Today, let's talk about the movement to reduce the importance of the issue. The reduction movement acknowledges that, yes, homosexuality is a sin, but it reduces the seriousness of the sin. Now, how did we get to that point? Because there was a time, most of you will probably remember, when we considered this not only to be sinful, but because it was a sexual sin, that alone made it serious in nature. Well, back in 1998, the well-known author Phillip Yancey started to change the course of our thinking on this when he released his book, What's So Amazing About Grace? Now, in Mr. Yancey's book, he described, among other things, the need for the church to show more grace to all people. And then he spent an entire chapter talking about his friend, the gay activist, Dr. Mel White. I mentioned Dr. White in last week's podcast. If you didn't see it, do check it out. Dr. White founded the pro-gay group Soul Force to challenge the church's understanding of homosexuality. Now, in the chapter that Phillip Yancey writes about Dr. White, he emphasizes all of Dr. White's good qualities, nothing wrong with that. But here's where it got dicey for me, and it should have gotten dicey for all of us. He specifically said, I refuse to take a position on homosexuality in this book. I'm not going to tell you where I stand. I don't want to talk about that position right now. I just want to talk about my friendship with Dr. White and how we need to show more grace. And not only did he refuse to take a clear stand on the subject in a book where he wrote a whole chapter about it, he also wound up shortly speaking at a pro-gay group called the Gay Christian Network. Now, none of that kept his book from being awarded the Christian Book of the Year award, and that sent out a broad message to the Christian population in general. It is okay not to make this a big deal. It is okay to view this with a certain amount of coyness. I'm not quite going to tell you what I believe on it because I don't think it's that big of an issue. We need to have more grace with each other. And in my opinion, that's when the reduction movement took off, without a name, of course. But the name I would first associate it with would be Phillip Yancey. Now, it got taken to a whole new level a few years later with a man named Andrew Marin. Andrew Marin was the founder of the Marin Foundation. Its stated purpose was to, quote, build bridges between the broader lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, and conservative Christian communities through scientific research and biblical and social education. Now, I've met Dr. Marin. I actually spoke at a conference with him, found him a very likable man, and in a lot of ways, I appreciate his heart on the issue. But my strong disagreement with him, in his teaching on homosexuality, he would reduce the seriousness of the issue by saying he would never take a position on it. In fact, he encouraged people in his books not to say whether or not they believed homosexuality was a sin, because he said, once you tell people that, walls go up, and we need to be about building bridges. As a matter of fact, that building bridges emphasis was so important to him that he would go to gay pride parades, as would his organization, and hold up signs saying, hey, we are the church and we are sorry we've been so terrible to you, lesbian and gay people. So his position was basically, we should not say that homosexuality is a sin. If you believe it's a sin, you should not say that. What you should do is apologize to lesbians and gays for the way the church has treated them. Now, his work was widely embraced by evangelicals. You'd hear him on Christian radio quite a bit. His one book, Love is an Orientation, was an absolute bestseller. He was a very influential voice in the church, especially during the late 90s and early 2000s. His basic premise was that relational bridges are more important than clarity. Relational bridges are more important than clarity. You know what I think? I think that sounded like good news to a lot of believers who were just sick of fighting about this stuff. I get it. I'm sick of fighting about it too. I mean, when you've got friends who are gay, you've got family members who are gay, you got coworkers who are gay, you don't want to fight with them. You do get kind of put off by the way a lot of Christians address the topic when they're too harsh or too oversweeping in general in the things that they say. And you want to avoid tension. I mean, so often we look at the way we relate to people and we think, how can I relate in a way that avoids tension? Okay, that's okay if you want to give a massage. It's not okay if you want to preach the gospel. And I think you know why. Tension represents the labor pains of new birth. Tension represents labor pains of new birth. When truth collides with error, you better believe there's going to be tension. If you don't want tension, your only option is to not speak the truth. And that's my biggest beef with the reduction movement. It's a reduction not only of the importance of the issue, but of the tension, and it basically messages this idea. Homosexuality may be a sin, but it's not a primary issue. The primary issue, build bridges with the LGBTQ community. Anything wrong with building bridges? Absolutely nothing. But when building bridges becomes the primary goal at the expense of speaking truth, then yes, something is very wrong. Now, how successful has the reductionist movement been, or the reduction movement been? Well, I mentioned in our last podcast that the author and speaker Jen Hatmaker had switched over to a gay-affirming position. She now promotes the pro-gay theology, gay-affirming theology. Her lesbian daughter came out to her, and Miss Hatmaker kind of reconsidered her position and said, well, gay people go through so much pain. I'm going to embrace a pro-gay interpretation of the Bible. I think that's the right interpretation to take. Now, Lifeway Products let her go because of that, and rightfully so, rightfully so. But she still continues to speak and communicate. She's got a podcast now. And as a Christian woman who openly advocates that homosexuality is legitimate, one of her early guests was the very influential, widely respected author, Max Lucado. Max Lucado appeared on her show knowing very well where she stands on homosexuality, and he didn't come on to correct her or to challenge her, nothing like that. As a matter of fact, here's what he said, and I quote, but if you and I both call God our God and Jesus our Savior brother, the Holy Spirit our power, the Father our strength, if we agree on those big rocks, then we got to figure out a way to be together. And so I think that's step number one. It's not an option. Oh, I see. So the foundational truths about the Trinity are the big rocks, but truths about human sexuality and marriage are what? The pebbles? Evidently not so important. Because what Mr. Lucado was basically saying was we can disagree on the definition of marriage and sexuality, but we can still be in communion and in unity, can we? Well, the short answer is no, but let me say I at least understand why people want to be. I'm tired of contention. I would rather get along. Um, and I think that's a normal desire we have, and I think it's a desire we should have. And when we can make peace, good grief, let's make it. But if you are a steward of truth, you will be the object of contention. Let me repeat that. If you are a steward of truth, you will be an object of contention. Jesus said, you're not going to be exempt from this. I did not come to bring peace. I came to bring a sword. That is to say, truth divides. So the question should not just be, is our approach relational? The primary question should be, is our approach biblical? And then let's be as relational as we can be, but we put the biblical above the relational. That's the only proper way to be a steward of truth. Now, for a biblical model, I should say a couple of them. Let's look at different approaches, the approach to the Samaritan woman and the approach to the Corinthian man. To the non-believer, Jesus goes to a Samaritan woman who does not know God. She is in sexual sin. He does not get into a big argument with her over whether or not she should be living with a man. He certainly does not affirm fornication, but he doesn't zero in on it either. To him, the main point is he wants her to know him and to be born again. That is a proper approach with someone who is not born again. We don't argue sexual ethics with them as much as we argue or discuss, I should say, present the claims of Jesus Christ, the gospel. That is the main issue we present to the unsaved. But contrast that to the way Paul says we should deal with someone who calls himself or herself a believer, and that takes us to the Corinthian man. In the Corinthian church, a man was involved in sexual sin. Paul addressed the church and says, it is commonly reported there's fornication among you, and you've done nothing about it. You are just sitting there. You are even patting yourselves on the back for being so affirming. And he really takes them to task and says, if this man is not repentant, you must put him outside the church. You have to discipline someone who is not willing to repent of overt sexual sin. You cannot tolerate sexual sin of any kind. In this case, it was incest and or fornication or prostitution, adultery, or homosexuality. So the church cannot tolerate and should discipline sexual sin when it exists. What we cannot do is negate the seriousness of the doctrine. As Paul said to the Ephesians 5:11, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. I like the way Father John Whitehood put it in an article he did in the CRI Journal, quote, falling into a sin is sinful but not heretical. However, teaching that a sin is not really a sin is both sinful and heretical. Yeah, the reductionist approach is not just wrong, it's heretical. It emphasizes kindness over truth. Let me try another analogy with you, okay? When I go to a doctor, I expect to be treated nicely. I expect respect out of that guy. And if he doesn't respect me, I'm out of there. I mean, if I walk in the office and he's just like, oh, you again? Yeah, you look ridiculous. What do you want? Okay, goodbye. I expect him to have a good bedside manner. But that's not all I expect, is it? I got to have a couple of other things from him that are crucial. I need a diagnosis and I need a treatment plan. I don't go to him just for a good bedside manner, although that's very good. But I also need to know if there's anything wrong with me, tell me what it is. I need a diagnosis. And if there is something wrong with me, give me a treatment plan. Tell me what to do about what is wrong with me. That's his job as a doctor. Could you imagine him simply having a good bedside manner and being very nice to me when I come in and telling me that I'm a wonderful person and I leave feeling good and then I die? You think he did his job? Neither do we. Hey, let you and I have the best bedside manner we can. Welcome, agreeable, friendly, respectful, gentle, very approachable. But let's not be so concerned about our bedside manner that we forget about diagnosis and treatment plan, because that's our job as the light of the world. Okay, next week, I want to talk to you about a third trend I'm real concerned about, a third pro-gay trend that is influencing the church. It's what I call the re-identification trend, or what we would call the gay Christian trend, by which people identify themselves by their sexual desires. Now, if you have not yet subscribed, again, I want to ask you to hit that bell and subscribe to this podcast. Also, if you want to pursue a more detailed conversation about how we can approach dialogue with people who hold pro-gay viewpoints, check out my book, Speaking of Homosexuality. You can get that on Amazon.com. That is Speaking of Homosexuality by Joe Dallas. Also, if you appreciate this podcast and you appreciate our work here at Cloudfire Ministries, we provide this free of charge, of course. We want to go on doing it. We really need your help for that. Okay, so if you enjoy what you're hearing, please partner with us. Go to joedallas.com/giving, joedallas.com/giving, and that'll tell you how your tax-deductible gift can help keep us going here. All right? And finally, if you would like a free ebook on the pro-gay interpretation of the Bible and how we can respond to it, go to my email address, joe@joedallas.com. Email me, joe@joedallas.com. Tell me you want that free ebook. I'd be glad to send it out to you, okay? Well, we're here every Friday, Christians in a Cancel Culture. I'll look forward to talking with you next Friday about what I call the re-identification movement, the third pro-gay trend going through the church that concerns me, should concern all of us. Hey, I'll see you then. God bless.